Hello and welcome to the Cinematic Summary channel. In this video, we'll give you an easy and quick rundown of another critically acclaimed film. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the video. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give the video a like if you enjoyed it.
In this video, we are going to present a beautiful romance story released in July 2022 in theaters. A noble suitor courted the young woman in 19th century England. However, when she is rejected by a list of criteria to get a bride, the young woman seeks revenge in kind. If you want to know the complete story, follow the video. The film begins in England in 1802, showing the childhood friendship between Julia Thistlethwaite and Selina Dalton in the dormitories of Mrs. Finch's school. They dream together of the times when they will marry. Selina comments she has nothing material to offer a husband, while Julia laments she doesn't have a loving father to match her. They regret having to part, however. They committed to maintaining their friendship. Time passes, and in 1818, they introduce us to the Honorable Mr. Jeremy Malcolm, an elegant man known to be the season's hottest catch among the English nobility. He was looking for a bride, but not just any kind of girl. He had a unique way of getting a suitor, which earns him a certain reputation. The newest claimant to that post was Mississippi Julia Thistlethwaite on a date during opera singing. They talk during the performance, and Julia shows a lack of knowledge about the opera, committing a gaffe by not knowing and confusing the composer. At that moment, Mr. Malcolm tests her, asking her what she thought about the Corn Laws. Pretending to be understood, Julia says she agrees with such laws, arguing that dietary restrictions can be healthy. On the other hand, they introduce us to Selina Dalton in her humble country house. Her mother met her at the door, saying she has a visitor. He is Mr. Woodbury, a senior nobleman who tries to woo her by promising better conditions for her and her entire family. With unattractive attempts at convincing, Selina politely dismisses the man, who leaves the house in frustration. Julia sits with her mother, and they read letters. Among them is a letter from Selina, but also an envelope with a pejorative caricature of her and Mr. Malcolm. In the engraving, the two were together, and the message was written next. Afraid of public humiliation, she hurries out to buy every copy of the London Society newspaper. She further sends a letter to her cousin, Lord Cassidy, a friend of Mr. Malcolm. Upon reading the letter, Cassidy questions Mr. Malcolm about his cousin and the reputation of destroying women's dreams that he was gaining. Mr. Malcolm shows his list of requirements and points to the fourth item, talking sensibly. Confronted by his friend, Malcolm says that he even has criteria for his stable of horses, and how could he not have to choose a bride? Julia finds her cousin and tells her that news of her humiliation would soon spread across England. He recounts his conversation with Mr. Malcolm and his list of requirements for a bride. Julia is revolted by Mr. Malcolm's criticism and is hurt, so she decides he should get revenge in kind. Julia writes a letter to Selina, inviting her to spend the rest of the season at her house. Her friend welcomes Selina, and soon after, Lord Cassidy joins them. During the meeting, Julia asks Selina for help with her revenge plan. In the plan, Selina is supposed to be the perfect suitor for Mr. Malcolm, but after he falls in love, she must submit her list, in which he does not meet the requirements. That would be perfect poetic justice, according to Julia. Selina resists convincing, saying it is a dishonest plan, but in the name of friendship, she ends up accepting it. Then begins the preparations to make Selina a more attractive person, as the first requirement on the list suggests. With Lord Cassidy's help, Selina learns to dance and also meets the second requirement to become more graceful. Following the list, Selina needed to educate herself more through reading, have an elegant spirit, and knowledge of the world, not have artificiality in her behavior, and maintain the charm of naivety that so attracts men. At a party, Julia takes Selina to a greenhouse to await the opportunity to introduce her to Mr. Malcolm. But inside, Mr. Malcolm brings up the subject and both philosophize. After getting to know some of Selina's insightful personality, Mr. Malcolm takes his leave to return to the party. And right at the first contact, and naturally, Selina met two of the requirements on the list: educate herself through reading and talk sensibly. Lord Cassidy goes to meet Selina to take her inside the party. Inside, They were all gathered talking when finally Selina officially met Mr. Malcolm. At that moment, she invites her to a tour of an art gallery the next day. When the day of the meeting arrives, they both talk about the heartbreaker reputation that Mr. Malcolm carries. Then Captain Henry Ossery appears, a mutual friend between Selina and Mr. Malcolm. Henry thanks Selina for being an excellent caretaker and companion to his uncle's widow during the last few years of her life. At that moment, again naturally, Selina met one more requirement on the list, being altruistic and charitable. Henry says goodbye and says he'd like to visit Selina at the address she's staying in town. During a painting session, Selina receives a visit from Henry that waits for her with Julia and her mother as she prepares to leave. Julia and Henry flirt with glances subtly as they say goodbye. Henry reveals during the tour that his aunt hoped they would meet and marry. They meet Mr. Malcolm and inform him of the upcoming ball he was invited to attend. While on a walk, Selina tells Julia and Lord Cassidy that she has received a letter from her mother asking her to visit her cousin's widow. Julia warns her that since this widow had already been married twice, it was best to hide her parentage from Mr. Malcolm, as a requirement on the list was having noble and high society relatives. Julia also says that Selina should play the piano at a dinner between them, since another requirement on the list is having musical talent. During dinner, Henry reveals himself to be a war hero, and, despite Julia's provocations, he pleases everyone at the table with his humor. After that, Mr. Malcolm asks Selina what she thinks of the church-building law. Selina says that she is the daughter of an ecclesiastic and that it is important to have temples for everyone, but that this is expensive and advantageous for the government, which only uses it to stifle and control conflicts, claiming that, with the same costs, the government could better favor the poor to achieve the same goals. Henry draws applause from the table and Mr. Malcolm says he thinks the same as Selina, who has just met one more requirement on the list, which is to be spontaneous, sincere, and correct. Later, in a piano session with the help of Lord Cassidy, Selina meets another requirement on the list, musical or artistic talent. At a horse auction, the group reunites and meets Mrs. Colvington, the widow of Celine's cousin. Despite being friendly, she behaves inelegantly towards the group. Mr. Malcolm asks where Celine met her, but Julia chimes in saying that she is her seventh cousin. Mr. Malcolm extends another invitation, this time to ride with Celine. As they walk with the horses, he shares a saying from his family. A man who marries a woman marries her whole family. Selina received a new invitation, this time with her parents, to a big party at Mr. Malcolm's home. Upon returning from the tour, Mr. Malcolm steps on Selina's dress and rips it open, but she doesn't care, saying the dress can be fixed. On this point, Selina fulfills two more requirements on the list, being thoughtful and kind, then finally the 10th of them, having a forgiving nature. On the property of Mr. Malcolm, he introduces all guests to the hostess, Mrs. Elizabeth Malcolm. They sit down to afternoon tea when Selina's parents unknowingly reveal Mrs. Calvinton. Mr. Malcolm realizes they lied about her parentage to protect Selina from his opinion. He apologizes, saying how sorry he was for being so arrogant. During the night in the bedroom, Julia asks Selina to create a list of requirements to get revenge on Mr. Malcolm. She confesses that likes him and tries to convince Julia to forget about revenge, but it was no use. The next day, the guests gather for hunting and afternoon tea and decide that the ball will be in costume. During the party, guests appear and music plays. Henry and Julia flirt between teasing and lunges and start dancing along with the other guests. Mr. Malcolm also takes Selina out for a dance, and Julia realizes that this is a good time to act. One maid removes Selina from the dance, saying she needs her, but locks her in a room. Meanwhile, another servant delivers a message to Mr. Malcolm, asking him to meet Selina at the office. When he gets there, he receives a paper by hand, and Selina runs out of the office. On the sheet is written, "Qualifications for a husband, not making others feel they don't measure up to a certain standard." The real Selina unlocks herself from the room and returns to the party. She spots Julia with an equal costume to hers, and Mr. Malcolm chasing her. At the moment of the act, Julia confesses her intentions of revenge, and of having used Selina to provoke the feeling of rejection in Mr. Malcolm. Upon realizing that Selina was part of a plan, Mr. Malcolm is disappointed and leaves for the ball. Selena is disappointed and goes to her room, while Julia is left alone crying after the episode. The next day, Julia admits to her cousin and Henry that she was wrong. Afterward, Henry alone with Julia reveals how attractive she is to him, and the two share a kiss. Lord Cassidy meets Mr. Malcolm in the stable and tries to clear things up. But he accused him of revealing his list and says without it, the plan would not have happened. He leaves disgusted at having been a game piece. Selena receives an unmarked letter inviting her to join a tour of the Rose Garden. Arriving there, she finds Mr. Malcolm, who says he received the same invitation. They argued, exchanged accusations, and failed to come to terms. Julia finds Selena to apologize, saying she hates herself for ruining her chances with Mr. Malcolm. She also confessed to feeling jealous to see her win him over without even trying. Selena forgives her friend, saying that if it weren't for her plan, she would never have had the chance to fall in love with anyone. Then Selena asks her to prepare a carriage so that she could leave. Meanwhile, Mrs. Malcolm tells his son that she was the one who planned the Rose Garden tour. She said he let her down to learn he had a list that made him so arrogant and judgmental. Mrs. Malcolm told his son that love cannot be planned so carefully. She stated that the allure of love is that things get a little messed up in the process. So Mr. Malcolm runs his horse after Selena. Upon stopping the carriage, he hands her a new list of requirements written. 1. Selena Dalton. He apologized and said he was insecure about being in love, and that's why he didn't believe her. He said that she was the greatest happiness the world has ever offered him, and asked her to marry him with a kiss. Selena accepts the request.
So, did you like the video? We'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions on the movie, so please leave a comment below. Also watch other of our summaries of the best movies in cinema. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in our next video.